Tonight we have new developments in the shooting that left a baby in North St. Louis dead. Hours ago, prosecutors charged a 10-year-old who they say pulled the trigger with murder. Police say a 19-year-old is also facing gun charges.
There are moments that leave an entire community asking the same impossible question. Not because what happened is difficult to understand, but because it feels impossible to accept. A quiet neighborhood, an ordinary home, a baby who had barely begun life, and a 10-year-old child now at the center of a criminal investigation. When emergency dispatchers received the call, they knew it was serious. An infant had been shot inside a home. First responders rushed to the scene, hoping there was still time. But within moments, it became clear this would not end the way everyone hoped. The baby was pronounced dead. Then came the next revelation. Investigators weren't searching for an adult gunman. They were trying to understand how another child, a 10-year-old, had allegedly fired the weapon. How does something like this happen? Where did the gun come from? Who was supposed to be watching? Could this tragedy have been prevented? And perhaps the most difficult question of all, what happens when a child becomes the accused in one of the most heartbreaking cases of the year? Today, we're carefully walking through everything investigators have publicly confirmed about this case, separating verified facts from rumor, examining the timeline, the investigation, and the difficult questions this tragedy has raised about firearm safety, parental responsibility, and a justice system faced with an almost unimaginable situation. Because sometimes the most disturbing true crime stories aren't about calculated evil. Sometimes they're about ordinary moments that unravel in seconds and leave families forever changed. This is that story. Before we begin, it's important to remember that much of this investigation is still developing. Authorities continue to gather evidence and court proceedings are ongoing. Some details may change as additional information becomes public. Our goal is not to sensationalize a tragedy or assign blame beyond what investigators have established. Instead, we'll focus on the confirmed facts, the official investigation, and the broader questions this heartbreaking case has raised across the country. With that said, let's go back to where this story began. Like thousands of neighborhoods across America, the area where this tragedy unfolded was the kind of place where life usually followed a predictable rhythm. Children played, parents worked, neighbors exchanged quick greetings while checking the mail or mowing their lawns. Nothing about that day suggested it would become the focus of national headlines. Inside one home, however, something would happen that investigators say lasted only seconds, but would forever alter multiple families. Authorities believe an unsecured firearm became accessible inside the residence. Exactly how it became accessible remains one of the key questions investigators continue examining. Firearms are present in millions of American homes. For many owners, they're kept for personal protection, hunting, sport shooting, or collection. Responsible gun ownership organizations, law enforcement agencies, and pediatric safety experts all emphasize one point over and over again. A firearm should never be accessible to a child. Most accidental shootings involving children happen inside homes where adults believe the weapon was safely stored. Sometimes the firearm is left loaded. Sometimes it's hidden instead of locked. Sometimes adults believe a child doesn't know where it's kept. And sometimes those assumptions prove tragically wrong. Investigators have not suggested this case was planned. Instead, according to publicly available information, they are working to determine exactly how a 10-year-old allegedly gained access to the weapon and how an infant ultimately suffered fatal injuries. Those answers may emerge during court proceedings. For now, many questions remain unanswered. What is known is heartbreaking enough. An infant lost their life. A child now faces allegations almost impossible to comprehend, and an entire community is left searching for explanations. For first responders, scenes involving children are among the most emotionally difficult calls they encounter. Police officers, firefighters, emergency medical personnel. Many have spoken publicly over the years about how incidents involving young victims stay with them long after their shifts end. Although these professionals receive extensive training, nothing truly prepares someone for walking into a home where a baby has been critically injured. Every second matters. Medical equipment is rushed inside. Commands are shouted. Attempts are made to stabilize the victim. Hope remains until doctors determine there is nothing more that can be done. Behind every crime statistic is a family whose lives have been permanently divided into two chapters, before that day and after it. This family now joins that painful reality. As investigators secured the home, the questions came quickly. Where had the firearm been stored? Who legally owned it? Who was responsible for supervising the children that day? Was anyone else inside the residence when the shot was fired? Did anyone witness what happened? And perhaps most importantly, could this tragedy have been prevented? Crime scene investigators began documenting every detail inside the home. They photographed each room, collected physical evidence, and carefully mapped the scene to understand exactly how the events unfolded. To most people, a home is a place of comfort. To investigators, however, every object inside can become a piece of a much larger puzzle. The position of furniture, the location of the firearm, the trajectory of the bullet. Even something as ordinary as an open door or a misplaced chair can help detectives reconstruct a timeline that no one living can fully describe. Unlike television crime dramas, investigations like these are rarely solved in a matter of hours. Every witness statement must be compared. Every piece of forensic evidence must be analyzed. Every timeline must be tested for consistency. And when children are involved, investigators often move even more carefully. Not only are they tasked with determining what happened, but they must also protect the rights and privacy of the minors connected to the case, while ensuring the integrity of the investigation remains intact. As word of the shooting spread throughout the community, disbelief quickly turned into heartbreak. Neighbors struggled to comprehend how such a devastating incident could happen in what had seemed like an ordinary home. Many found themselves asking the same questions investigators were asking. How did a child gain access to a loaded firearm? Could someone have intervened before tragedy struck? Was this simply a terrible accident, or were there failures that allowed it to happen? Those questions soon spilled onto social media, where speculation began spreading almost as quickly as the news itself. Some people immediately blamed the adults. Others questioned whether criminal charges involving a 10-year-old were appropriate. Still others urged patience, reminding everyone that the investigation was only beginning and that many of the facts had yet to be confirmed. Law enforcement echoed that message. Detectives urged the public not to jump to conclusions while evidence was still being processed and witness interviews were ongoing. In cases like this, assumptions can quickly become misinformation, making an already painful situation even more difficult for everyone involved. Behind every headline is a family whose lives have been permanently changed, an infant whose future was cut tragically short, a child now facing circumstances few could ever imagine, parents and relatives left trying to make sense of an event that unfolded in only a matter of seconds. For investigators, however, emotion alone could not determine what happened. Only evidence could. And over the coming days and weeks, that evidence would begin to answer some of the questions that had emerged, while raising several new ones that would prove even more difficult. As the investigation progressed, authorities would eventually announce charges that shocked many people across the country. Those decisions sparked an intense national conversation about firearm safety, parental responsibility, juvenile justice, and where accountability truly begins when a tragedy involves children. To understand why investigators reach those conclusions, we first need to rewind and carefully reconstruct the events leading up to that devastating moment. Because sometimes, the smallest decisions made hours earlier can shape everything that follows. And in this case, investigators believe that's exactly what happened. To understand how investigators believe this tragedy unfolded, we have to go back to the afternoon of June 26, 2026. At first, there was nothing to suggest the day would end in one of the most heartbreaking criminal investigations Missouri had seen in years. Inside a home in North St. Louis were several children, including 7-month-old Kiyomi Parker. Like most infants her age, Kiyomi depended entirely on the adults around her. She couldn't walk, She couldn't speak. Her world consisted of the people entrusted with keeping her safe. Somewhere else inside the residence was a 10-year-old boy. Because he is a juvenile, authorities have not publicly identified him, and throughout this documentary, we'll continue to respect that privacy. Investigators say another child, just 7 years old, was also inside the home that afternoon. What should have been an ordinary day changed in only a matter of moments. According to court documents, investigators believe the 10-year-old knew there was a handgun hidden underneath a mattress inside one of the bedrooms. That detail would become one of the most significant findings in the investigation. Police allege this wasn't the first time the child had known about the firearm. According to investigators, the boy later told detectives he already knew where the gun was kept and had handled it before. If those statements are accurate, they suggest the weapon had been accessible for some time, not just on the day of the shooting. Exactly what happened over the next few moments remains known only to those who were inside the home. Investigators believe the boy retrieved the handgun from beneath the mattress. At some point afterward, the firearm discharged. The bullet struck 7-month-old Kiyomi Parker in the head. Whether the shooting occurred while the gun was being examined, handled, or pointed is information authorities have not publicly detailed. What is clear is the devastating outcome. Within seconds, a normal afternoon became a medical emergency. Adults inside the residence immediately realized something had gone terribly wrong. Someone called 911. Dispatchers alerted police and emergency responders to a shooting involving an infant. For officers, these are the kinds of calls they hope never come. Every second matters. The first officers arrived quickly and found Kiyomi suffering from a catastrophic gunshot wound. Rather than waiting for an ambulance, officers made the decision to perform what's known as a scoop and go. It's a tactic used when every moment counts. Instead of delaying transport, officers placed the infant into a police vehicle and raced toward the nearest hospital, while another officer continued life-saving efforts in the back seat. Other officers cleared traffic along the route in an effort to shave precious seconds off the drive. Despite those efforts, doctors were unable to save Kiyomi. She was pronounced dead shortly after arriving at the hospital. Back at the residence, the investigation was already underway. Homicide detectives and child abuse investigators responded together, a sign that authorities immediately recognized this case would require expertise from multiple divisions. The home was sealed off with crime scene tape. Detectives began interviewing everyone who had been present. Every statement was documented, every timeline compared, every room carefully photographed. Among the most important pieces of evidence was the handgun itself. Investigators needed to determine not only who owned it, but also how it ended up within reach of children. That question would soon lead detectives to 19-year-old Kamarian Pawnell, Kiyomi's father. According to court documents, Pawnell admitted the firearm belonged to him. Investigators say he acknowledged storing it underneath a mattress inside the home. That admission would dramatically change the direction of the investigation. Instead of treating the shooting solely as an act committed by a child, detectives began examining whether an adult's decisions had created the circumstances that allowed the tragedy to occur. In many states, prosecutors can pursue criminal charges against gun owners whose unsecured firearms are accessed by children, particularly when that access leads to serious injury or death. Missouri investigators ultimately concluded the evidence supported criminal charges not only against the juvenile, but also against the adult who allegedly left the weapon accessible. The announcement stunned many observers. Public attention initially focused on the age of the accused child, but as more information emerged, many people began asking a different question. If a 10-year-old knew exactly where a loaded handgun was hidden and had reportedly accessed it before, should the greater responsibility rest with the child or with the adult who left it there? That question would soon become one of the defining issues in the case. As investigators continued reviewing the evidence, prosecutors faced an extraordinarily difficult decision. On one hand, a 7-month-old infant had lost her life. On the other, the person accused of firing the gun was just 10 years old. Cases involving juvenile suspects are handled very differently from those involving adults. prosecutors must weigh not only the seriousness of the alleged offense, but also the child's age, level of understanding, and the circumstances that led to the tragedy. At the same time, detectives were examining the role of the adults responsible for the home. According to investigators, the firearm belonged to Kiyomi's 19-year-old father, Kamarian Pawnell. Court documents allege that he kept the handgun hidden beneath a mattress, an area that prosecutors say was accessible to children inside the residence. Authorities also allege that the 10-year-old had known where the firearm was stored and had previously handled it. If true, investigators believe that suggested the weapon had not been secured in a manner that prevented children from accessing it. After reviewing the evidence, prosecutors announced charges against both the juvenile and Pawnell. The decision immediately drew national attention. Some people believe the charges reflected the devastating consequences of leaving a loaded firearm within reach of children. Others questioned whether a 10-year-old could truly comprehend the full danger of handling a gun, arguing that the adults should bear the overwhelming share of the responsibility. The case quickly became about more than a single tragic incident. It sparked a broader conversation about firearm storage, parental responsibility, and how the juvenile justice system should respond when children become involved in fatal shootings. As news of the charges spread, legal experts, child advocates, and community members all weighed in, often reaching very different conclusions. Some emphasized accountability, others emphasized prevention. But nearly everyone agreed on one point. A 7-month-old baby had lost her life, and nothing the courts decided would ever change that. As the legal process moved forward, investigators continued gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, and preparing for what would likely become a closely watched case. The coming weeks would reveal more about what prosecutors believed happened inside that home, and why they were confident enough to move forward with criminal charges against both a child and an adult. Those developments would shape the next chapter of this heartbreaking story. As this case continues to move through the courts, many of the legal questions remain unanswered. The evidence will be examined, witnesses will testify, attorneys will present their arguments, and ultimately the justice system, not public opinion, will determine the legal outcome. For now, what we know comes from investigators, court documents, and the information that has been released publicly. As with any ongoing criminal case, those facts may continue to evolve as additional evidence is presented. But regardless of what happens in court, there is one truth that cannot be changed. 7-month-old Kiyomi Parker lost her life. For her family, this case isn't just another headline or another story dominating social media. It is a deeply personal tragedy that has forever altered the lives of everyone who knew and loved her. Some wounds cannot be measured in court filings or criminal charges. They are measured in empty bedrooms, in birthdays that will never be celebrated, in family photographs that will never include another smiling face, and in the quiet moments when loved ones are reminded that someone is missing. As heartbreaking as this case is, it has also sparked an important national conversation, not simply about crime, but about responsibility. Millions of American households legally own firearms. For many families, those firearms are kept for protection, hunting, sport, or recreation. Owning a firearm, however, also carries a profound responsibility, especially in homes where children are present. Law enforcement agencies, pediatricians, firearm instructors, and safety organizations often agree on one critical point. Firearms should be stored unloaded, locked, and inaccessible to children, with ammunition secured separately whenever possible. Those recommendations exist because children are naturally curious. They explore. They imitate what they see. And unlike adults, they often cannot fully understand the irreversible consequences of handling a deadly weapon. Time and again, investigations across the United States have shown that many shootings involving children do not stem from malicious intent. Instead, they begin with a simple chain of preventable events. A firearm left unsecured, a child who discovers it, a single moment of curiosity, and a decision that lasts only seconds but changes lives forever. Investigators in this case allege that access to a handgun inside the home became the critical factor that allowed this tragedy to unfold. Whether the courts ultimately agree with every allegation is something only the legal process can determine. But the questions raised by this case reach far beyond one household in St. Louis. Parents across the country have found themselves asking difficult questions. Are my firearms truly secure? Could a child find them? Have I relied too heavily on hiding a weapon rather than properly locking it away? Have I had honest conversations with the children in my home about what to do if they ever discover a firearm? Sometimes tragedies don't change laws overnight. They change habits. They change conversations. They encourage families to revisit safety practices they may not have thought about in years. Perhaps that will become one lasting legacy of this heartbreaking case. The legal questions surrounding juvenile responsibility have also prompted thoughtful discussion. How should society respond when someone accused of a serious crime is still a child? Can a 10-year-old fully understand the consequences of handling a firearm? Should the focus be punishment, rehabilitation, accountability, or some combination of all three? These are not easy questions. There are no simple answers. Courts have wrestled with issues involving juvenile justice for decades, recognizing that children are different from adults in important ways, including how they understand risk, impulse, and long-term consequences. At the same time, communities also expect accountability when innocent lives are lost. Balancing those two realities is one of the greatest challenges facing the justice system. Cases like this force people to confront uncomfortable truths. Sometimes there isn't a single decision that leads to tragedy. Instead, there is a chain of decisions. One assumption leads to another. One overlooked safety measure leads to another, until eventually an irreversible moment occurs. Investigators often describe tragedies like these as preventable, not because anyone can predict the future, but because removing just one link from the chain may have changed everything that followed. If the firearm had been stored differently, if it had been locked away, if access had been impossible, would Kiyomi still be alive today? Those are questions that no investigation can answer with certainty. They are questions that will likely remain with everyone connected to this case for years to come.